I'm Evelyn, 32, female, and my life took a sharp turn the day my mother announced my brother would be moving into my house. It wasn't a question or a discussion. It was a declaration, delivered with the casual authority of a queen bestowing a favor over lukewarm coffee at the chipped formica table I'd known my whole life. They'll be moving into your house next month, Mom said, stirring a third spoonful of sugar into her mug. She didn't look at me. Her gaze was fixed on some distant, happy future that clearly didn't require my consent. Just found a wonderful paint swatch for the living room, a kind of dusty rose. It'll be so much warmer. I felt the smile spread across my face before I could stop it. It was a strange, brittle thing, a mask I'd perfected over decades. Perfect, I heard myself say, the word sounding impossibly light. I'll start packing this weekend. Mom Brenda finally looked at me, a flicker of surprise in her eyes before it was replaced by smug satisfaction. She had expected a fight, a tantrum, the usual emotional display she so expertly knew how to dismantle. My easy agreement was a victory she hadn't even had to work for. Good, she said, nodding. It's for the best, Ev. Kevin needs a stable place to start his life with Jessica, you understand. Kevin, my brother, the golden child, the perpetual project my parents had poured their lives into. At 28, Kevin was a struggling musician, a title he'd worn proudly for a decade as if the struggle itself were a noble profession. He drifted from one gig to another, his life a chaotic masterpiece of irresponsibility, all of it subsidized by our parents and indirectly by me. Beside him always was Jessica, his fiancée, a woman whose primary talent seemed to be encouraging Kevin's sense of entitlement. They celebrated that night. Mom called Kevin on speakerphone, and I had to sit there, sipping my now cold coffee, listening to their joyous planning. She's finally being sensible, Kevin crowed from the other end of the line. Jess, baby, you hear that? We have a house, no more cramped apartments. Jessica's voice, shrill with excitement, chirped, "Oh, wonderful. I can't wait to get rid of that awful gray she has in the kitchen. And the garden, I've always wanted a rose garden." They talked about my home as if it were already theirs, a vacant property waiting for their personal touch. My years of hard work, the careful savings, the pride I felt in my independence, it was all being erased, painted over in their minds with a dusty rose. I just smiled and nodded, a silent, hollow ghost at their victory party. But as I drove home that evening, the brittle smile finally crumbled, and the cold, hard knot of reality settled in my stomach. This wasn't just about a house. This was the culmination of a lifetime of being the sensible, reliable foundation upon which my brother's unstable dreams were built. The house was just the final straw. My mind drifted back through the years, collecting the evidence of their betrayal like a prosecutor building a case. The first major exhibit was the college fund incident. My parents weren't wealthy, but they had diligently saved for me, the responsible firstborn. But when I was 17, Kevin, then a teenager, decided he needed to find artistic inspiration in Europe. My college fund was borrowed from. It's an investment in his future, Evelyn, my father had explained, avoiding my eyes. He has a gift. This trip could be the making of him. The money was never repaid. The trip resulted in a portfolio of moody photographs and a handful of poorly written poems. I ended up working 2 jobs through college, taking on student loans that I was still paying off while Kevin's investment gathered dust in the attic. There was no apology, only an unspoken expectation that I understood and accepted my role. Then there was the car incident. After graduation, I saved for a year to buy my first reliable car, a modest but clean sedan. It was my pride and joy, a symbol of my hard-won freedom. Within a month, my mother started the campaign. Kevin needs to get to a gig across town. You don't mind, do you, sweetie? Kevin's car is in the shop again. He just needs to run some errands. I minded terribly, but saying no meant facing a tidal wave of guilt. So I'd hand over the keys, my stomach twisting with anxiety. The inevitable happened one rainy Tuesday. Kevin, rushing to meet a girl, hydroplaned and slammed my car into a guardrail. The damage was significant. He was fine, thankfully, but his first words to me were not "I'm sorry." But don't worry, the band is getting bigger. I'll pay you back when we get famous. When I approached my parents, hoping for some semblance of justice, I was met with a tired sigh. Evelyn, he feels terrible, Mom said. Don't make it worse. You have a good job. You can afford the repairs. He can't. It was my responsibility to absorb the consequences of his reclesson. I paid for the repairs myself and never let him touch my keys again, a boundary that branded me as selfish and unforgiving. The final and most significant exhibit was the house itself. It was my sanctuary, the one place on earth that was truly mine. I'd managed to buy it 2 years ago, a small but charming bungalow with a sturdy oak tree in the front yard. My ability to do so was thanks to my grandmother, my mother's mother, a quiet, observant woman who saw the family dynamic with perfect clarity. She had secretly left me a modest inheritance, slipping the check to me a month after the funeral with a note that read, "Build something for yourself, Evelyn. Something they can't touch." My mother was furious when she found out. She believed the money should have been shared or rather given to Kevin. "He needs it more than you," she had screamed during one memorable fight. But the money was legally mine, and I used it for a down payment on a house they couldn't touch, or so I thought. For 2 years, they had chipped away at that boundary. They borrowed my lawnmower and never returned it. They held family gatherings in my backyard without asking. They criticized my furniture, my paint choices, my very presence in a space they felt should have belonged to their son. And now they were done chipping away. They had brought out the sledgehammer. Driving up to my little bungalow that night, seeing the warm light spilling from the windows, I didn't feel the usual sense of peace. I felt a cold, sharp clarity. They believed I would roll over, that my love for my family would outweigh my self-respect as it always had. They believed they had won. I smiled again, but this time it was different. It wasn't brittle or fake, it was real. As I unlocked my front door, the home that was mine and mine alone, a plan began to form. They had celebrated their victory, but the war wasn't over, it had just begun, and I knew with absolute certainty how I was going to win. The 24 hours after the announcement were a masterclass in deception. On the outside, I was the picture of compliance. I called my mom the next morning to ask what day, exactly, Kevin and Jessica were planning their grand arrival. "The 30th, she said, her voice buttery with satisfaction. "That gives you almost a full month. I told Jessica you'd be happy to leave some of your nicer furniture, the big sofa, for instance. It would save them so much money." "Of course," I said, my voice smooth as silk. "I'll make a list of things I can leave behind." I could almost hear her beaming through the phone. She was picturing it all, her daughter, the ever-reliable martyr, quietly vacating her life to make way for her son, the deserving prince. She imagined me boxing up my books, my clothes, my memories, all with a sad but accepting sigh. The reality was so much different. Inside, my shock had crystallized into something cold and hard: resolve. The years of accumulated resentment, the thousands of tiny cuts, had finally cauterized into a single, clean purpose. They wanted my house, fine, they could have it, but not in the way they imagined. That afternoon, Kevin and Jessica dropped by unannounced, a tape measure in Jessica's hand. They walked through my living room, their eyes already stripping the walls and replacing my life with their own. "This wall will have to go," Kevin declared, tapping on the plaster between the living room and my small home office. "We could make this a huge open-plan entertainment space, perfect for when the band gets together." Jessica was already measuring the windows. "I'm thinking floor-to-ceiling curtains, velvet maybe, and we'll definitely need to rip out this carpet. Hardwood floors are so much more elegant." They spoke as if I wasn't even there. I was a ghost in my own home, a temporary custodian waiting to hand over the keys. I leaned against the kitchen counter, sipping a glass of water, and just watched them. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were observing two strangers in a movie. The pain was still there, a dull ache deep in my chest, but it was being overshadowed by the hum of my burgeoning plan. "What do you think, Ev?" Kevin asked, turning to me with a magnanimous smile, as if he were generously including me in my own dispossession. "It sounds lovely, Kevin," I said, my voice even. "You'll make it a wonderful home." His smile widened. He was so used to my resistance, my quiet arguments for fairness, that my complete and total surrender was intoxicating to him. It confirmed everything he believed about himself and about me, that he was destined for great things and I was destined to facilitate them. "We appreciate you being so cool about this," he said, clapping me on the shoulder in a rare gesture of brotherly affection. It felt like a brand. They stayed for an hour, mapping out their future in my present. They talked about where their wedding photos would hang, where the bride's room would eventually be, how they would host Christmas in their new home. With every word, the cold resolve in my gut grew colder and harder. They were not just taking a house, they were stealing a future, my future, and expecting me to thank them for it. The moment they left, the air in the house seemed to shift. The silence they left behind was heavy with their entitlement. I walked through the rooms they had so casually redesigned, touching the walls, the furniture, the window frames. This place was a testament to my survival. I had built it piece by piece out of the ashes of their neglect, and I would be the one to decide its fate. I walked into my home office, the very room Kevin had sentenced to demolition, and sat down at my desk. I looked at the photos on my wall, me at my college graduation, me hiking in the mountains, me with my small circle of real friends. These were the moments they couldn't touch, the life I had built for myself despite them. With a steady hand, I opened my laptop. My fingers flew across the keyboard, my search history a testament to my new purpose, top real estate agents in my area, how to sell a house fast, cash buyers for homes. I found a realtor with glowing reviews, a woman named Sarah who specialized in quick sales. Her website promised a no-obligation consultation. My heart pounded in my chest, a mixture of fear and exhilarating freedom. This was the point of no return. I took a deep breath and dialed her number. Sarah Reynolds speaking, a professional, warm voice answered. "Hello, Sarah," I said, my own voice surprisingly calm. "My name is Evelyn. I need to sell my house, and I need to do it as quietly and as quickly as possible." There was a brief pause on the other end. "I can help with that," Sarah said. "When would be a good time to talk?" I looked at the calendar on my desk. The 30th of the month was circled in red, a date my mother had marked as my eviction day. I smiled. "How about tomorrow morning?" I said. "I'm suddenly very motivated." Sarah Reynolds was a whirlwind of brisk efficiency and sharp intelligence. When she arrived at my house the next morning, she took in the tidy living room, the well-kept garden, and me with a single appraising glance. I had expected a barrage of questions about my motivations, but she seemed to understand that discretion was the priority. "It's a beautiful home, Evelyn," she said, her tone professional but kind. "In this market, a property like this, it'll move fast. You mentioned you wanted a quiet sale." "The quietest," I confirmed. "No for sale sign in the yard, online listings only, and I need a buyer who can close before the end of the month." Sarah's eyebrows shot up. "That's an aggressive timeline." "I have an aggressive motivation," I replied simply. She nodded, a small, understanding smile playing on her lips. "I see. Well, the best way to do that is to price it competitively and target cash buyers, investors or relocating families who don't want the hassle of a mortgage process. We'll get less foot traffic, but the offers we do get will be serious." We spent the next hour walking through the house. I pointed out the new water heater, the recently updated bathroom, the solid oak floors I'd lovingly refinished myself. With every feature I highlighted, I felt a pang of loss, but it was immediately smothered by a wave of righteous determination. I was not losing a home, I was liquidating an asset to fund my escape. The process became my secret life. By day, I was the dutiful daughter fielding calls from my mother about logistics. "Evelyn, do you have any spare boxes in the attic? It would really help Kevin get a head start," she'd ask. "I'll check, Mom," I'd reply, all while I was secretly scheduling a photographer to take pictures for the online listing. The stress was immense. I lived in a constant state of low-grade panic, my phone buzzing with notifications from the Realtor app while I was on the phone with my family. I'd have to duck into another room to reply to Sarah, my heart pounding, certain that my double life was about to be exposed. The first viewing was scheduled for a Wednesday afternoon. My excuse to the family was a last-minute work deadline. I scrubbed the house from top to bottom, making it look pristine and impersonal. As the potential buyers, a young couple relocating for a new job, walked through the rooms, I sat in my car parked down the street, my hands shaking. This was real. Strangers were in my sanctuary, judging its worth, deciding if they wanted to make it their own. My family's obliviousness was my greatest asset. They were so wrapped up in their victory that they couldn't see what was happening right under their noses. One evening, my brother Kevin called me, his voice full of the casual arrogance I knew so well. "Hey, Ev, Jess and I were thinking, since you're just going to be renting a small apartment, you probably won't need your big wash. R and dryer, you could just leave them for us, right? It would be a huge help." I looked at the top-of-the-line appliances I had saved for 6 months to buy. "Sure, Kevin," I said, the words tasting like ash. "No problem at all." "Awesome, you're the best, sis," he said and hung up. He didn't ask where I was moving. He didn't ask if I needed help. The transaction was purely one-sided. A week after the house was listed, Sarah called me. "Evelyn, I think we have it. It's an all-cash offer from that first couple who saw the house. They love it and they can close in 2 weeks. It's a little under our asking price, but for the speed and certainty, it's a very strong offer." I sank into a kitchen chair, the phone pressed hard against my ear. 2 weeks, that was it. In 2 weeks, the house would no longer be mine. The abstract plan had suddenly solidified into a concrete, terrifying deadline. "It's perfect," I whispered, a wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy. "Take it, let's do it." The paperwork was a blur of digital signatures and encrypted emails. I arranged for a remote notary, citing my busy work schedule. I spent my evenings on my laptop, not looking for apartments nearby, but for flights. I scrolled through listings in cities thousands of miles away, places where the air was different, where no one knew my name or my family's story. I settled on a city on the Pacific coast, a place nestled between mountains and the ocean, a place I had dreamed of visiting but never had the courage to make a reality. I found a small, furnished apartment available for a 6-month lease, a perfect landing pad. With a few clicks, I booked a one-way ticket, paid the deposit on the apartment, and arranged for my company to officially transfer me to full-time remote status. Every step was a quiet act of rebellion, a secret stitch in the new life I was weaving for myself. While my mother was happily telling her friends how generous I was being, I was finalizing the sale of my largest asset. While my brother was picking out new furniture online, I was scheduling a moving company to take a small handful of my most precious belongings into long-term storage. The plan was in motion. The countdown had begun, and no one in my family had a clue. They were so blinded by what they were gaining, they never once stopped to think about what I was doing. The day the sold sign went up on the online listing, a digital marker only I could see, the true emotional weight of my decision began to settle in. Packing up the house was no longer a theoretical task for some distant future. It was an urgent, finite project. I had less than 2 weeks to dismantle the life I had so carefully constructed. I began in the attic, the quiet, dusty repository of my past. This was where the process became less about logistics and more about archaeology. I unearthed boxes of old report cards, faded photographs, and childhood artwork. Tucked in the corner was a box labeled Kevin's Things, filled with the debris of his abandoned hobbies. A half-finished model airplane, a barely used guitar, the portfolio of inspirational photos from his Europe trip. I looked at it all not with anger, but with a profound sense of detachment. This was someone else's life, someone else's responsibility. I closed the box and left it there. Downstairs, I began to sort the contents of my home into 3 distinct categories: keep, donate, and trash. The process became a ruthless, liberating form of therapy. The keep pile was surprisingly small. It consisted of my grandmother's rocking chair, a box of my favorite books, my professional design equipment, and a handful of personal mementos that held real, untainted value. These were the things that defined me, not my relationship to my family. I carefully wrapped them and stacked the boxes neatly in the corner of the garage, ready for the storage-bound movers. The donate pile grew exponentially. Clothes I hadn't worn in years, kitchen gadgets I rarely used, furniture that was perfectly good but held no sentimental value. I scheduled pickups with local charities, feeling a quiet satisfaction with every item that left the house. I was lightening my load, literally and figuratively. The trash pile was for the ghosts. A framed photo of my family from a holiday 5 years ago, everyone wearing forced smiles. I stared at my own face in the picture, at the tension in my shoulders, and tossed it into a black garbage bag. Old birthday cards from my parents with generic store-bought sentiments. In the bag, a chipped mug that said "World's Best Sister," a gag gift from Kevin one year. I let it smash at the bottom of the bin. The most difficult room to pack was my office. This was my creative space, the engine room of my independence. Taking my prints off the walls and dismantling my desk felt like a betrayal of the person I had become in that room. But I reminded myself that my creativity and skill were not contained within these four walls. They were inside me. I could take them anywhere. My family's intrusions during this period were surreal. One Saturday afternoon, my mother dropped by, catching me in the middle of boxing up my entire kitchen. "Goodness, Evelyn, you're being so efficient," she exclaimed, beaming. "Getting a head start on clearing things out for Kevin." "Just trying to be organized," I said, carefully placing a stack of plates into a box I'd labeled "Donate." She didn't notice. Her eyes scanned the room and she frowned. "You know, Jessica was saying she wants to knock this wall down to put in a breakfast bar. You should probably just take all these cupboards down now. It would save them the trouble." The audacity of it stole my breath. She was asking me to demolish my own kitchen as a favor. The old Evelyn would have argued. She would have pointed out the unfairness, the sheer nerve of the request. But the new Evelyn, the one with a plain ticket in her email inbox, just smiled. "I'm not sure I'll have the time, Mom," I said sweetly, "but I'll see what I can do." She patted my arm, satisfied. "You're a good girl, Evelyn." The hardest part was maintaining the facade. I had to pretend to be sad about leaving. I had to act like I was looking at dreary, overpriced one-bedroom apartments in my own city. I even fabricated a story about a potential rental on the other side of town, describing its flaws in detail to my mother to make it sound believable. "It's so small," I'd say over the phone, "and the kitchen is tiny, but I guess it will have to do." "Well, that's what happens when you live alone," she'd reply, her voice devoid of sympathy. "You can't expect to have a big, beautiful house all to yourself forever. It's a stepping stone." Her words, meant to comfort her own conscience, were a constant reminder of why I was doing this. They didn't see my house as my home, the pinnacle of my achievements. They saw it as a temporary station, a resource to be reallocated when a greater need, meaning Kevin, arose. As the moving day for my keep pile approached, I felt a rising tide of panic. The physical act of seeing my most cherished possessions being loaded into a truck made it all irreversibly real. I was erasing myself from this town, from this life. It was a controlled demolition of my own identity. After the movers left, the house felt cavernous and empty. The echoes of my footsteps sounded alien. It was no longer a home, it was just a property, a shell. I spent my last few nights sleeping on an air mattress in the living room, surrounded by the ghosts of what used to be. The quiet was profound. It was the sound of an ending, but it was also the sound of a beginning. I was a blank slate, waiting for a new story to be written. And for the first time in my life, I would be the only author. The closing happened on a Tuesday, conducted entirely over email and secure digital portals. At 11:03 a.m., I received a notification. The funds had been transferred to my account. I stared at the number on my banking app, a figure larger than any I had ever seen. It wasn't just money, it was freedom. It was the quantifiable value of my escape. I immediately transferred the bulk of it to a new high-yield savings account with a completely different bank, one my family had no knowledge of. I left a small amount in my old account to cover the last few bills. The finality of it was electrifying. The house, my house, was officially no longer mine. Legally, I was a visitor with 3 days left before I had to vacate. That evening, I had my last phone call with my mother. Her voice was giddy, bubbling with plans for what she was now calling the family home. Kevin and Jess are just so excited, Evelyn. They rented the moving truck for Saturday morning. They figure they can get all their big stuff moved in by noon. You'll be all packed up and ready for them, won't you? I'll be ready, I said, my voice a perfect imitation of weary resignation. I was sitting on the floor of my empty living room, my words echoing in the space. And you'll leave the spare keys under the mat. They'll need to get in early to direct the movers. Under the mat, I confirmed, a bitter smile on my face. The new owners already had their own keys. The ones I would leave would be a useless token, a final, silent piece of misdirection. Good, this is all working out for the best, she chirped. You'll see, once you're settled in your little apartment, you'll be so much less stressed. Owning a house is a lot of responsibility. It was too much for a single girl like you anyway. I didn't argue. I didn't say that the responsibility had been my greatest joy. I didn't say that her words were dripping with a condescension so profound it made my bones ache. I just said, "You're right, Mom." I know I am. I'll see you Saturday to help them then. Love you. Love you too, I lied and hung up the phone. I knew I would never hear her voice. In real time again. A wave of grief washed over me, so sharp and sudden it felt like a physical blow. It wasn't grief for the mother I was losing, but for the mother I had never had, one who would have been proud of my house, one who would have defended it and me. I spent the next 2 days executing the final stages of my plan with robotic precision. I packed my single suitcase with clothes for the new climate. I triple-checked my flight details. I packed a small box with my laptop, important documents, and a few snacks for the journey. This, along with my suitcase, was all that was left. Everything else was either in storage or gone forever. My last night in the house was surreal. I ordered a pizza and ate it on the floor, the grease staining the cardboard box. The silence was absolute. There were no humming appliances, no ticking clock, no gentle creaks of a house settling. It was just a hollow space waiting. Before going to sleep on my air mattress for the last time, I walked through each room, my hand trailing along the walls. I didn't feel sadness anymore. I felt a profound sense of gratitude. This house had been my shelter, my fortress of solitude. It had protected me and allowed me to become strong enough to leave it. It had served its purpose. Now it was time for it to be a home for someone else, a family who would appreciate it, who had chosen it, who deserved it. In the morning, I woke before the sun. I deflated the air mattress, folded it neatly, and placed it by the back door as a final donation for whoever found it first. I wiped down the counters, swept the floors one last time, and put the trash out. My car was waiting in the garage, already packed with my suitcase and box. I took the old set of keys, the ones my mother had asked about, and walked to the front door. As promised, I slipped them under the welcome mat, the mat that read Home Sweet Home. Then I got in my car, pressed the button to open the garage door, and without a single look back, I drove away into the pre-dawn darkness. The road ahead was open and unknown, and for the first time in my life, I was the only one in the driver's seat. The drive to the airport was a strange, dreamlike journey through the sleeping suburbs of my old life. I passed the park where I used to play as a child, the library where I discovered my love for books, the high school where I'd first felt the sting of being second best. Each landmark was a ghost, a memory from a life that no longer felt like mine. I felt no nostalgia, only the quiet hum of departure. At the airport, I moved with the purposeful anonymity of a seasoned traveler. I checked my one suitcase, navigated security, and found my gate with time to spare. I bought a coffee and a newspaper I had no intention of reading and sat by the large window, watching the planes take off and land. My phone, which I had deliberately left on, remained silent. It was too early for the chaos to begin. The boarding call felt like a summons to my new reality. As I walked down the jet bridge, I felt the last threads connecting me to my past begin to fray. The click of the door sealing shut was the sound of my escape becoming absolute. I found my window seat, settled in, and as the plane taxied down the runway, I put my phone into airplane mode. The ascent was breathtaking. The world I knew shrank below me, the familiar streets and buildings dissolving into a meaningless patchwork of shapes and colors. I saw the river that cut through the city, the cluster of buildings downtown, the sprawling suburbs that eventually faded into green countryside. I was leaving it all behind. A single tear traced a path down my cheek, but it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release. The flight was 5 hours long, 5 hours of liminal space where I belonged to neither my past nor my future. I watched a movie, I listened to music, and for the first time in a month, my mind was quiet. There were no secret plans to manage, no lies to maintain, no impending confrontations to dread. There was only the gentle roar of the engines and the endless expanse of clouds below. When the plane began its descent into my new city, my heart started to pound with a different kind of energy. Not fear, but anticipation. I looked out the window at a landscape that was dramatically different from the one I had left. Majestic, snow-capped mountains rose in the distance, and the deep blue of the ocean stretched out to the horizon. It was beautiful. It was new. It was mine. Navigating the new airport, collecting my bag, and finding a taxi felt like a test, one that I passed with flying colors. I gave the driver the address of my new apartment, and as we drove, I looked out at the city with wide, curious eyes. The air smelled different here, cleaner, with a hint of salt and pine. The apartment was in a modern building in a vibrant neighborhood. It was small, but it was clean and bright, with a large window that looked out over bustling street with a view of the distant mountains. The furniture was simple but stylish. It was a perfect blank canvas. I dropped my suitcase on the floor and walked to the window. I stood there for a long time, just watching the flow of my new city. People were walking dogs, carrying groceries, laughing with friends. It was a world that had been moving along just fine without me, and it was a world that would welcome me without any preconceived notions. Finally, after hours of blessed silence, I knew it was time. I sat on the edge of the new bed, took a deep breath, and turned my phone back on. The deluge was instantaneous. A torrent of notifications flooded my screen, dozens of missed calls, a string of text messages that grew longer by the second. My phone vibrated nonstop for nearly a minute, a frantic buzzing signal of the chaos I had unleashed from 30,000 feet. The storm had broken and I was thousands of miles away, safe in my new harbor. I let it buzz, waiting for it to fall silent before I dared to look. The aftermath had begun. With the city lights beginning to twinkle outside my window, I opened my phone. I decided to listen to the voicemails first, to hear the story unfold in their own words. I started with the first one from my mother, timestamped 10:05 a.m. Evelyn, we're here with the truck. Kevin's trying the key you left, but it's not working. Did you leave the right one? Call me back. Her voice was laced with minor irritation, the tone of someone inconvenienced by a simple mistake. The next message was from Kevin 10 minutes later. His voice was more agitated. Ev, what is going on? Some guy just came out and said this is his house. He said he bought it. Is this some kind of stupid joke? Because it's not funny. We have movers here we're paying by the hour. I smiled. The new owner, a kind man named Mr. Henderson, was clearly not one to be trifled with. Then came the third voicemail from my mother again. The irritation had been replaced by a rising panic. Evelyn, the man showed us paperwork. It says the house was sold. What did you do? You need to call me right this second. This is not happening. I could picture the scene perfectly. The big moving truck idling on the curb, my brother's face turning red with frustration, my mother's carefully constructed world crumbling around her. The messages grew more frantic and furious as the morning wore on. You sold it, Kevin screamed into the phone in the fourth message. You sold my house after we planned everything, after you said it was fine. How could you do this to us, to me? Jessica is in tears. The fifth voicemail was the one that truly laid her bare. It was my mother, her voice no longer panicked, but low and venomous, filled with a lifetime of resentment. You were always a selfish, ungrateful child, she hissed. Your grandmother spoiled you, and this is the result. We gave you everything, we loved you, and you throw it all back in our faces. To humiliate your brother like this, to humiliate your family. You are no daughter of mine, do you hear me? You have no family anymore. I listened to it twice. We gave you everything. The words were so disconnected from reality that they were almost laughable. They hadn't given me everything, they had taken everything they could. They hadn't seen the house as mine to give, but as theirs to take. My actions weren't a betrayal, they were a consequence. I scrolled through the text messages. They were a chaotic stream of accusations, insults, and threats. From Kevin, you will regret this for the rest of your life. From Jessica, I hope you're happy, you ruined our future. From Mom, don't you ever contact us again. I read each one, feeling not pain, not anger, but a profound, cleansing wave of detachment. Her final text was a gift. It was the permission I never would have had the strength to give myself. With a steady finger, I went into my contacts. I started with my mother. I looked at her name, Mom, for a long moment, then I pressed the button, block this caller. A pop-up asked me to confirm. I did. Then I did the same for Kevin and for Jessica. One by one, I erased the channels of my own destruction. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of freedom. I stood up and walked back to the window. The city below was alive with light and energy. The mountains stood as dark, silent sentinels against the night sky. For years, my world had been so small, confined by the expectations and demands of three people. Now the world was vast and full of possibilities. I had lost a house, but I had gained a life. I had lost a family, but I had found myself. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know where I would be in a year or even in a month. But for the first time, that uncertainty didn't feel like a threat. It felt like an invitation. A real smile, warm and genuine, spread across my face. I was thousands of miles away in a city of strangers with nothing but a suitcase and a savings account to my name, and I had never felt more at home. To the listener, what you've just heard is my story. It's a story about boundaries, about respect, and about the moment you realize that sometimes the only way to win a fight is to refuse to play the game. They thought they were taking my house, but what they really took was the blindfold I had been wearing my whole life. They forced me to see the truth, and the truth, as they say, set me free. My only regret is that I didn't do it sooner. For anyone out there feeling trapped, feeling like your success is treated as a community resource for those who refuse to build their own, know this: your life is your own. Your home is your own. Your future is your own. Don't ever let anyone make you feel guilty for claiming it.